And we start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another masterclass. Today, I welcome Christina Brun Nytsell. She is from Sweden. She's an entrepreneur. She's a social investor and an impact investor. And her session is called Transform Passion into Entrepreneurship and Intrapreneurship. Christina, as said, is originally from Sweden. And when she was a child, she had 4 hobbies. One was sport. She even went to school by skis. The other one was music. The next one was playing with Lego bricks. And the next one was languages. So she is a language talent. And it's basically her talk is about learn from other disciplines. And today, as you see already with the background picture with the mountains, it's about sport, but there are 3 other sessions to follow in a series: music, Lego bricks, and language. But that will be later this year. And today we have the first course about learn from other disciplines. This is sport. Questions are allowed. You can ask them in the chat, but we would love to have a very interactive session once Christina has finished her presentation. Christina, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for joining us today.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. And welcome, everyone. I'm going to keep this very informal. I was thinking for a long time, how to share my experiences of being an entrepreneur for nearly 30 years and how I would summarize that in 20 or 40 minutes. And as you can imagine, I was kind of scratching my head for quite a few weeks, and initially started off with something very big, and then I ended up with something very simple. I was looking back at my life and thinking about what was it as a child when I was maybe 6 or 7 that I did that really set me on this path of becoming an entrepreneur. And, what did I learn from doing other things? What did I learn from practicing sports, doing music, learning languages, skiing to school every morning. We had snow in Sweden in those days. Now it's kind of global warming and we're growing grapes like everybody else and making wine. But what can you really learn about it? And I want to kind of also debunk some of the myths about being an entrepreneur. So I think that's where I want to start. But before I do that, I want to encourage those of you who are doodlers, doodling, like drawing. Yeah, if you have a pen and a piece of paper, I have a little bit of a game for you. Yeah. And I don't want you to paint Mona Lisa now. It's like, it can be a stick person and it can be anything that you want it to be. But if you can draw an entrepreneur while you're listening, and then, writing down kind of the 3 attributes that you would describe that entrepreneur, with. It could be an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur. It could be somebody who's an artisan that just, has their own business and knits hats and sells in the local market. It's whatever you define an entrepreneur to be. So feel free to doodle and feel free to ask questions as well and intervene. So I wanted to start off with, first of all, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction as well. I've kind of started off, I don't come from an entrepreneurial family, but it's something that I've always wanted to be. And in school, my teachers always asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, an entrepreneur. Yeah. And I was always said, well, you need to get a job first and then you become an entrepreneur. And I never kind of got that. So when I went to university, I was always looking for ways, how can I be an entrepreneur? And I already had some ideas in terms of what I wanted to do and the businesses that I wanted to set up. But I kind of went through, like a lot of other people, the university route, and then ended up being in businesses and organizations. And with an entrepreneurial mindset, the first thing they do is you apply for a job, they put you into a job. And the first thing you try to do is, of course, change your job role, because your job role will never fit an entrepreneur. So you become very entrepreneurial. You develop new products, you develop new services. And, everywhere I've gone, I've kind of been in one job and always ended up in another job and another position. It's like you outgrow your shoes very quickly. And it's not because you want to are you looking for dominance, or you're just a very creative person, and you see things that can be done all the time, and possibilities and opportunities. You wake up every morning thinking, great, you know, there's so much to do. So, you know, that's kind of the mindset I've always had. So I kind of want to start off by putting you on the path of comparing entrepreneurship with sports, or how shall I put it? What can we learn from sports that applies to entrepreneurship? So one of the things that I did as a child, my parents kind of put me into every sport. I was kind of an all-eater. You know, I did ice hockey, I did skiing, I did land hockey, I did swimming, I did, you know, anything you could possibly imagine. It's like there was a sport here, there's a piece of sport equipment, and I was doing it. And not because I was kind of approaching it in a competitive way, but I was just like, wow, there's all these sports. This is fantastic. So I was literally kind of practicing everything. And that's kind of became the starting point of this presentation. And what can you actually learn from all these sports? Because some of them are like individual sports, some of them are team sports, some of them are extreme sports, some of them are endurance sports. I'm an endurance swimmer. I used to do kayaking, canoeing, you know, so, you know, there's a lot of things there that you kind of different skill sets for different sports, but somehow they also had a lot of things in common, you know, persevering and pursuing. And when it's a bit hard and you don't really master your tennis racket or your hockey stick, and I even used to play golf with, like, you know, I would play hockey. And anybody knows that that does not work. If you're doing the swing, the ball will end up in the bushes. But hey, you know, it's like, you know, you give it a try. So I wanted to kind of start off by actually eliminating some of the myths around entrepreneurship. Because when everybody was kind of just trying to discourage me from becoming an entrepreneur, they kind of went down the route of describing entrepreneurship as an extreme sport. And I don't know if any of you are kind of into the extreme sports. If any of you are, please raise your hands or kind of scream. Yeah, you are. Yeah. Do you want to explain to me what extreme sports is? How would you define it with kind of one sentence? Or do you want me to?
I think it's really difficult because I really like surfing and ultra running. Yeah. And those are two completely different extreme sports. I think the one thing they do have in common is kind of the underlying exhaustion and fear that you have to drive through. So it's more mental than physical. Yeah. So you have to transcend kind of the mental barriers, and then you can perform physically. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, I totally get that, you know, and I would actually like to transfer that into a business environment, because when people talk about entrepreneurship, you know, when I was really young, they were saying to me, you know, it's like really high risk, you know, it's really tough, and you know, you need to be tough, you need to have, you know, physical and mental stamina. It's going to be really hard. You know, you need to be kind of exceeding the ordinary, you need to be superhuman. I mean, there was all these things, you know, but anybody who's kind of been doing endurance sports know it's kind of like a build-up, you know, it's like very incremental, small little bricks every time, and you kind of push yourself a little bit, you go a little bit further, you go a little bit further. And it's not really about taking a lot of stupid risks. It's really about taking managed risks. It's about not being risk averse, but managing the risks that you have in front of you. And the way you do that is by developing skills, mental skills, which keeps you strong mentally, but also the physical skills that allows you to kind of go the extra mile. So when people were kind of telling me, well, entrepreneurship is going to be really hard for you, I was kind of going back to my endurance sports days of you know, doing endurance swimming and thinking, well, I don't think so, because I've got these skill sets. What if I just transfer them over into being an entrepreneur? And I started thinking about entrepreneurship in a different way. And sometimes it's kind of this mindset shift change, you know, people want to put you in a box and say, well, ooh, it's going to be very difficult. Ooh, it's going to be very hard. And we get this little monkey on our shoulder, as we say in Sweden, kind of whispering, saying, you know, it's going to be very hard. But if you've been successful endurance runner, for example, or a swimmer, you can kind of transfer that skill set of kind of overcoming, persevering, moving forward, and figuring out how you can kind of pace yourself. So I started looking at entrepreneurship not just as an extreme sport. This is, by the way, in the desert. I wanted to get a picture of the desert as well, because I used to live in the Middle East for about 8 years, and watching all the kind of the female athletes who were driving motocross in the desert. So anyway, it was just an example of that. But I started looking at entrepreneurship more like an endurance sport. And once you start looking at entrepreneurship more like an endurance sport, I started looking at it more like, well, it's actually a sport that you engage with in the natural environment. And once you put sports in the kind of the natural environment, you start talking about it in a different way. You start using different words. Well, it's about an adventure lifestyle. It's about nature-based sports. It's about green living. It's about strong relationships with the environment, circular living, nature-based learning, playfulness, and family. And, this kind of, for me, created that mind shift of entrepreneurship is almost impossible. And once you put it into that kind of more endurance sport field, and compares it more to an endurance sport, the language that you use becomes different in terms of how you look at the world. And I think it's very important, that mind shift as an entrepreneur. As you embark on being an entrepreneur, you're always going to have a lot of people telling you it's going to be difficult, it's going to be hard. And therefore it's important to go in with this kind of endurance sport mindset, that it's possible if I do things in a step-by-step way and slowly but gradually build up my endurance, get the skills that I need, the experiences, and also, get advice, eat well, sleep well. It's not always about, the extreme. And it's the same kind of in pitch events, for example. If you're going into I don't know if any of you have been to a pitch event, if you've been an entrepreneur, it's kind of the same situation again. You have it's almost an extreme sport, because you have 15 companies, they got 7 minutes and they have to pitch their idea. And it's like bam, 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 bam. It's kind of also that really an extreme sport environment. And the entrepreneurs who kind of been in the business for a while, they go and sit in the coffee corner and they talk about their problems. How do I do this? How do I do that? So even in a room with different entrepreneurs, you can kind of see, those who are there to pitch for money and those who are there to, I need to talk to people because I have some, key questions that I need to get answered. And, you kind of hang with them in the coffee corner. But anyway, so I just wanted to kind of draw the parallels between sports and entrepreneurship and see it's not about an extreme sport. It's really about pacing yourself. And anybody can do it if you just build your skill set up over time, slowly but gradually. You're not going to be the perfect entrepreneur from day one. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to take risks. They're going to be costs. But it's really about having this more nature-based environment, So that's kind of my starting point, debunking the myths around what entrepreneurship is. And I also wanted to kind of compare it to a folk sport. And the reason why I wanted to compare it to a folk sport is because when we look at innovation or entrepreneurship, it's always going back to the kind of the Schumpeter idea of the lonely entrepreneur, who's extremely successful and he did it on his own. And at the end of this long journey of doing everything on his own, he wins a reward and he becomes very successful. Anything about entrepreneurship is, if you speak to a lot of entrepreneurs, they'll say is exactly the opposite. It's really a folk sport. And it's really not something you can do in isolation. You have to work with other people to build your business. And I did a project for about 2 years with Lego. Everybody knows the Lego company. And what was very interesting there is when they built their innovation and entrepreneurship capabilities is that they had like an innovation lab in Denmark, in Billund, where they have the Lego company. And they were having this lab, and they spent 2 years kind of developing their products. And then they were testing all their products with kids in Billund, whose parents, of course, works for Lego as well. And it was complete innovation in isolation from the community, from the environment, from the users and the consumers. And I was brought in to kind of build up their innovation capabilities and their entrepreneurship practice. And the first thing I did was actually get rid of the Idea Lab, because what it was doing was producing products with 80 million deficit, because the products were produced for kids who were living in Billund in Denmark, whose parents actually worked for Lego. So whatever you put in front of them, they will say, yes, I love it. Of course they wouldn't, because their dad works at Lego. So there was very little testing and a very long process. And the other thing is, like, the danger of innovating as an entrepreneur in isolation from the environment is that you're not innovating with your consumers. You're not involving them in the innovation of your business, and that's can easily be like a death trap moving forward. So in the case of Lego and building up their entrepreneurship practice, one of the things we had to do is actually map the whole Lego community onto the Lego innovation process, so that we moved innovation from the lab in the back actually out into the community. And we could see what had happened was that they'd actually believed that they were a toy company. They were completely misoriented. And what they actually were actually a publishing business. They were a publisher of bricks, of user-generated content. The community was a core asset. And does anybody know who the biggest users of Lego bricks is? If you were to give like an age or gender or anything, anybody can raise their hand. There's no right or wrong answer. Andrea, what do you think?
I actually think people in their 30s, and I think it's corporates.
No, it's actually part of the answer. It's actually boys or men between the age of 6 and 95. They account for 45% of the revenue of the business, but it's also actually a corporate tool or used for businesses for regenerating people who've had head injuries and everything. So they had a complete misconception about their business. And this kind of proves it's so dangerous to build a business and innovate your business from the inside out. So this idea also that you have of having to connect yourself up with who are your core customers or the market itself, to actually understand who your core users are and involve them in the whole process of developing the product is really key. They're not outside, they're in your business. And the more you can involve them, make them part of your business, the more successful you're going to be as an organization. So that was a big learning point for me, and also for the Lego company, because they were actually going bankrupt at the time, because they were producing, they thought they were a toy company, so they were producing plastic pieces, molded pieces, and it was too far away from their core business, which was bricks, the building system, and the community. And I think, this is a very important learning point, that we have to see entrepreneurship as a folk sport. And who are our customers, and how do we involve them in our business, and how do we make them part of our business? And that's also where I think, Role Model Rebels is a good example of a community that's involving the users in the development of the business and making them part of the business. So it is a very good example of that as well. But, the Lego company almost went bankrupt. And the other interesting thing is also that they, of course, were producing the bricks in Switzerland. And everybody knows that, Switzerland has quite high wages. So it's not the best place to produce it. And the other place to produce their products was actually in China, shipping it from China, which is also not very smart, because you have high volume products at a very low weight. And volume products shipped from China is a killer, because it's very costly. So anyway, there was a lot of changes we had to make. But the learning point here is that I think we have to see entrepreneurship as a folk sport, and who are the people that need to be involved in the business. And it's very important not to leave anybody behind, because as we're building the business, we don't always know who our core customers are, and we'll only know that once we start kind of, you know, working with the people, you know. So yeah, so that's why I kind of put this one up as kind of an example of, yeah, we need to see it as a folk sport. And the pictures you see here is actually when I was in London, I was working for a university called University of East London in connection with the Olympics. And we were very keen on looking at how we could involve abled and non-abled bodies in the Olympics itself. And one of the biggest challenges we have was access. So we worked a lot on access. And the other picture you see is actually the folk dances in Sweden. I think it's, you know, that's also something we had to practice as children in living in Sweden. It was part of our curriculum. It's a bit like skiing or skating, you know, we had the folk dance, and so we used to hate it. But, you know, there is something good coming out of that as well, because you had to learn to dance with your partner. And when you're 9 and having to dance with the boys, it's not that fun, I can tell you that. We were kind of like dragging them around the room, you know, trying to move them in circles. But, you know, if you've done it for 5 years, eventually you pick it up. And it's kind of fun to be able to dance these folk dances. We've kept to traditions, and it's group dance. It's kind of interesting also, when I moved to the Middle East, I was comparing, you know, the dances between, you know, the dances you have in the Middle East and the dances you have in Northern Europe. And in the Nordics, we always have these kind of folk dances where people are dancing together in large groups. And if you go to the Middle East, you have, you know, the stick dances and the sword dances with the men, and of course the women doing the belly dancing. So they're kind of dancing completely separately. In Sweden, it's kind of all communal, you know, long dances, you know, dances together, and, you know, everybody having to agree on, you know, you can't have somebody taking over the space on the dance floor and just kind of running around like a lunatic with our partner. There has to be space for everybody. So this kind of negotiation of space on the dance floor is working with a lot of people. You can actually learn a lot from that. So that's kind of why I put that here. And then going back to also looking at entrepreneurship as a mind sport. I think what you mentioned as well of being an endurance sports person, you talked about the mental stamina that you need to have to be, you know, physically also capable of pursuing, you know, your endurance sports. And I think it's really about honing both, you know, physically having the stamina to endure, but also having the mental stamina to endure, you know, above and beyond. But I see mind sport also in a different context. I see it more as kind of building and working together and building with everyone and not excluding anyone. And what we're doing with, I'm involved with UN Habitat at the moment, trying to look for ways in which we can build more kind of sustainable and healthier cities. And one of the challenges there is, of course, to include everyone and not leaving anybody behind, which is, you know, one of the principles of the UN. So, you know, something to think about when we're building cities or parks or buildings or communities in cities is, how do we involve everyone? What does the participation look like? So the mind sport here is also to think about, you know, inclusion, but inclusion with access. Because access without inclusion or inclusion without access, it doesn't work. So this is a very important piece, because otherwise we end up with a city that only works for a few and doesn't work for everyone. So having everyone's need in mind and balancing the needs of everyone. And this is a kind of a typical example where we were kind of like using Lego bricks to get this kind of participation in city development and you know, building greener and more sustainable cities. And it's a very, you know, interactive way. But I see this as also as an example of a mind sport. And then I kind of looked at, you know, what have I been doing in terms of, you know, there are different kind of sports. You've got individual sports and then you've got team sports. And I think individual sports is, hones and teaches certain skills. And I think team sports teaches you other skills. One of the things I used to do as a child as well was kind of rowing. I was in the rowing team. And I don't know if any of you have ever been in a rowing boat and trying to kind of row on the lakes and trying to get the oars to work, and things like that. But and rowing in the same direction and moving fast and understanding the elements in which you're in. And I think, one of the things I kind of learned from being in rowing is having that kind of coach and that person at the front who was kind of guiding and instructing and showing the way. And if you compare that to kind of entrepreneurship or building or starting a business, if you think about, the role of the board in a business, for example, it's really important not only to have the kind of the right management team and the right setup in terms of the people that you have close to you, your finance person, your operations guy, your legal team, your accountant, but it's really important to have a really solid and a good board, because when you really have questions and stuff you can actually don't know how to answer yourself, your first point of call is actually the board. And what's really interesting here in Sweden is that now we have like the compulsory 40-60 split in our board constitution. So we've legalized we put a legal system in place or a law or a rule which says that all companies listed on the stock exchange need to have 40% women in the board. And there was a lot of discussions around that for 10-15 years, but it has been institutionalized here because they see what they've been doing is doing a lot of research over 20-30 years, longitudinal studies on the performance of stock listed companies. And what they've seen is that, there is a link between diverse businesses, not only female led, but diverse businesses and female led businesses and the performance of the company. So they conducted kind of a 30-year longitudinal study, and similar to what was done with Catalyst in New York. They had a kind of a similar study. And what they've seen is that, the performance of the business actually increase if you have more women, on the board. So it's been very interesting. And there was a network in Sweden actually here running for a while, for about 10 years, called Göran. Göran is a very typical Swedish name. It's like Sven or Anders. I don't know if you've heard and come across any Swedish male names, but Göran is like Goran or St. George in the UK. And we actually had more men called Göran on the Swedish Stock Exchange than we had female CEOs or C people in the C-suite who were women. So they were kind of handing out the award every year, this called Göran Award, to the company who had the least women, on their board. And it was kind of like a negative award, but also an encouragement to kind of encourage them to think about, why don't you have more women on your board? And, maybe it should be more than just the secretary, or maybe it should be more than just, the administrator, but you're really thinking about your board constitution. And I think it has changed, but for about 10 years, nothing changed. There was more people with the name Göran, and it just continued year after year. And then us who were part of that group, we were just like, my God, this is a slog. It's like every year it's just the same, more and more, when are the women coming? But then they started coming, there was more and more of them. So it is a team sport. We need both men and women. We need diverse sports. We need young people. So one of the things I've been starting to ask more for is these shadow boards. Shadow boards are bringing diverse groups of people in, and also young people. And particularly now during the pandemic, I was a big advocate for these shadow boards with the companies and organizations that I work with, simply because, during the pandemic, we had to kind of pick up speed in terms of digitalization. And one of the things that young people have is extraordinarily good skills in terms of, digital skills, at least with my kids. I had 2 daughters, and some of the things that I have to do on my computer, they're just doing it. And I'm sitting there like for an hour, and it's like, oh, let me show you, Mom. So by bringing more young people into the organization, more diverse people, you're kind of training more and more people to come into these shadow boards and also understand how a business is being run and how they can influence and drive the future of that business. And I think that's really, really important. And I also saw that in sports, because when I was practicing sports kind of on a professional level, what they were also doing is getting the good athletes, the good, the strong performers in sports to also coach the younger kids. So we were also always going back and coaching the smaller kids, how to train football and ice hockey and, swimming and all that. It was kind of part of, giving back to the community, and it was almost expected of us. So you became a co-coach or a co-trainer or a co-something. Yeah, I think, the shadow boards are extremely important. And I think also they were doing it in the sports environment long before they started thinking about it in business. I think it's okay not to be an entrepreneur full time. People always ask me, I've been thinking about setting up a business, but I have my job, should I become a part-time entrepreneur? I have some friends actually in Sweden who are kind of artisans. One of them was the first glass blower first blower of studio glass in the world. This is a time when women were not blowing glass, and they certainly didn't have their own kind of glass blowing unit in their house. And she was kind of forced to become a potterer, because in those days, they were telling women, you can't be a glass blower, it's too hard for you, you can't do it with your lungs, it's too heavy, it's like all the things I said about, extreme sports, they were coming up with a long list why she couldn't do it, but she was determined. She wanted to be, blowing glass, and that was her life. She eventually became a world famous glass blower and kind of training other women as well. But it was kind of too hard. They were telling her that it was too hard for her. So she had a job. She trained to be a teacher. So she was teaching other artisans, and she kept glass blowing as a hobby for a long time. And over time she saw, well, this is my job. This is what I do. And she became a full-time glass blower. She built a house in my hometown. And she started developing studio glass and went down to Buda, and she traveled to Japan. She makes these fabulous kind of glass windows. So there's quite a few of those kind of artists and artisans in the town where I come from, where they started off kind of doing something that they really didn't want to do, but they were kind of almost, well, you need to have a proper job before you become an entrepreneur. And then over time, as their kids got older and they became more experienced, they converted their hobby into a full-time business. So this is also a way to look at it. If you have some artisan skills or something that is very unique that you feel very passionate about, convert it into a business and see if you can make it work before you shift from having a job to becoming an entrepreneur. It's a safe way of doing it. And I think it's the female way of doing it. We always said in the Middle East that businesses start at the kitchen table. And I think a lot of women's businesses start at the kitchen table. And that's perfectly fine. So we can actually refute the whole idea that this is an extreme sport that we need to throw ourselves out into and get 100 million loan and scale the company in 3 years and sell a unicorn. We have to kind of debunk that myth. There are different ways of being an entrepreneur. So, just go at it, kind of nibble away at it a little bit at a time, like in little mice, and then you'll get there. I'm always of the belief that, train them young, get them young and train them early. My father was kind of really instrumental in putting me on the path to becoming an entrepreneur. I remember I was like 6 and he gave me this really horrible task of weeding our garden from these dandelions, these kind of yellow flowers, like everywhere in the grass. And my parents had a huge garden. They had like a massive lawn, and I was 6 and I was given this tool, to kind of weed my garden. and now we get lots of money if I did it. So I saw the money. If I keep everything for myself, you know, I had to spend all day kind of weeding this garden. So what I did is went around and recruited all my friends, you know, like all my girlfriends. So we were at this with kind of our tools for like an hour and a half. We kind of split the money. We went to the ice cream store and we were just kind of lying on the grass for the rest of the day. And I think what I learned from that was that, well, it's much easier if you kind of divide the task. And then we figured out we could do it for the other neighbors as well. So we turned this into, I mean, maybe we weren't 6, but 7 or 8 or something. So we actually turned it into a very profitable business for the next couple of years before we could have proper summer jobs. We were literally kind of asset stripping our parents from cash. And we spent it in the local kind of store buying candy. You know, it's not a very healthy thing, but of course that's what kids do. But we had a great summers and our parents were happy. So, you know, you can learn something from that. So kind of train them young and, you know, and it should be part of the curriculum. We've started to put it on the curriculum in Sweden. I think it's very important that it should be. Let's hope it ends up on the curriculum everywhere. I wanted to say a little bit about impact investing or investing in general. People come and present companies to you. They will present every single company that they have as a brilliant unicorn. Unicorns don't exist, as you know. It's a fantasy creature. So what a lot of investors do, they're looking for the unicorn. It's the impossible thing to achieve because it doesn't exist. Everybody talks about the unicorns. And entrepreneurs are forced to come to these pitch events and actually sell themselves as unicorns. So what you end up having to do is turn your little horse or cow that you have, which is perfectly nice. You have to kind of dress it up with a painted tail. You have to kind of do the stripy hair and you have to kind of stick a horn at the front to get the cash. So there's this enormous expectations between what investors want and how you present yourself. And you're constantly trying to overcome that. Turn it around, do it the other way around, let them come to you. If they think you have something that is so unique, they will come to you and present yourself in that way. Don't pretend to be a unicorn if you're not, because unicorns don't exist. And then if you become an investor, investing in other companies, I always talk about the undercorns. It's actually the people who, businesses who pretend to be unicorn, but actually once you take off the hair and the little horn, you actually see this little dog. So they're trying to sell you something that is really great for a lot of money. But once you kind of strip the basic pieces off, you realize it's a nice little dog and you would have invested in the dog, but they're trying to sell it as a unicorn. So they're building up a whole huge presentation around how fantastic this unicorn is. But all you look at is this little dog, which is a beautiful dog and you would have invested in it, but they're trying to pretend it's a unicorn. So spot the difference. I think businesses are more like unicorns. You have to grow them. It's like corn. It takes a while and you have to water it. You have to look after it, get rid of the pests. You need more than one person because you can't sleep and live your business all the time. And eventually you can harvest and then you start again. It's like being a farmer. I think it's about the passion you have. You know, I have a lot of passion for sports. I think whatever you do is put your passion at the center. People always say to me, well, it's not really, you should keep your passion to your side, keep your emotions out of business. Business and emotion don't go together. I think it's really not the right way to look at it. I think it's really about your passion, because the passion is what's going to sustain you long run. You don't go to work every morning. I have not spoken to one single female entrepreneur for the last 30 years who says to me that they go to business, you know, running a business. They go to business with their passion and they run their passion into their business, and their business and their passion are interlinked. It takes guts. Yeah, everybody can do it, but it takes a team, it takes a village, and it takes a community. It's like raising a child. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to raise a business. And it starts with key questions. So I've summarized some of the key questions which have kind of driven me over the years. They've been kind of driven me to kind of become an entrepreneur in businesses and entrepreneur impact investors. And I've always looked for ways, you know, to solve really big challenges and transform challenges into large opportunities. And it's just something that drives me. I wake up every morning and, you know, that machine never stops. I go to bed with the machine, and that machine is actually running while I'm sleeping as well. And then I wake up every morning with new business opportunities. So for me, it's not a question of, I could probably kind of shed some of my passion and have a little bit less passion. So for me, it's very important to keep focused. But I wake up every morning with a new business idea. So I have to put it in a box. I have a little jar. I put it in there, and then I take my business out and I focus on that. And then in the evening, when I'm having coffee, sitting in front of the fireplace or having friends over, I take out my jar and I share my madness with them. If I don't do that, it goes pear-shaped. I think a business needs to be principled. It's not about values. All values are important, but we need to start with principles. And principles is what governs decision making. It's the stuff that your grandmother used to share with you, or grandparents. It's all the things, experiences that they learned from a long life, and they come and share those experiences with you. It's these nuggets of wisdom. Absorb them, because they spent a whole life gathering them. Learn from other entrepreneurs, find those nuggets and kind of bring them into your business. I keep a little notebook with quotes. So I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, there. Every time I meet an entrepreneur, I always note down these kind of wisdom, or in French, as you say, rite de passage, the battle scars that they come with. So I keep this notebook with me every time I go to conferences or meetings or boards, because they come out everywhere, these nuggets. And I use them kind of in my business, or when I'm working with other companies as well, because there's so much learning there. I mean, they come with battle scars. Use them. I've kind of drafted down a couple of questions here that I use, with myself, or also with other companies, to kind of build those principles. So if you start with these questions, there is such a thing as, when you answer that question, your principles are going to pop out. So this is kind of a tool you can take away and play with, in terms of developing a principle-led business. I think also innovation entrepreneurship it doesn't have to be the big unicorn, as I said. It can be just about doing, something that everybody's doing, but just doing it a bit differently, operationally kind of squeezing or tweaking something, so you get that change, or doing different things. That means coming up with something completely new. There are very few innovations or entrepreneurial companies which both do things differently and do things in a different way. That's a really disruptive business. There are a few of those. They exist. We work in the biotech space, so we work a lot with number 3, where we're innovating molecules, building a platform, and solving a disease that is underfunded in the research, like ALS or Huntington's, Parkinson's, things like that. There you find number 3, but for the most part, businesses are in the number 1 and number 2. Focus on that, just doing things a little bit differently from everybody else. It's about people. People are key. It's not about the idea. It's really about the people. And I think, in the role model rebel group, there are tons of fantastic people. I'm not going to say use them. That's probably not a good way, but, work with them, learn from them. We all come with our battle scars. Enjoy the journey. You can be anything you want. People always tell women, people always try to give women advice, let me help you, or let's collaborate. Women only need encouragement. You can be anything you want. You can be an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, impact entrepreneur, wannabe entrepreneur, or a feminine. And I think being a feminine means kind of also acknowledging the fact that we need to put the passion at the center. And if you're making that journey of starting a business, what do you put in your suitcase, and who do you make the journey with? And here, it's very important to choose your life partner, who you marry. Very few people tell you this, but it's the most important thing to have is an encouraging partner that you spend your life with, because at the end of the day, a business is always going to be a family business. It runs from the kitchen table. It runs with the family, in the family, and you cannot have life-work separation. It's one and the same. So that's it. So go out there and debunk the myth of what it means to be an entrepreneur. Anybody can be an entrepreneur. So there you go. That was it. Any questions?
Christina, first of all, I could have listened, I would say, for the next 2 hours, your stories. It was absolutely fantastic. And I think there are two things I really love about your talk, or I love tons of things, but the two last things you were saying, the one is run passion into a business. I think this is absolutely important. And everyone who knows me knows also I'm totally passionate about what I'm doing. And I just like, because I'm so convinced it's going to happen. It's going to be a great business. And the other one, I think it's also super important, how important it is to have the right partner on your side, by your side. And that I think is, I just loved everything you were talking about. And, of course, we also have this, you will say, urine effect in the board in Sweden. We have in the German-speaking countries, you have the Thomas and the Christian. And we also have this kind of prize. It's called the Yellow Citron, or the Citron Prize by the Albright Foundation. However, I just would like to give the floor to all the participants. And I know we have some entrepreneurs here, and we also see already the hands. And I would say, before we start with, is it right, Joanna? Joanna, yeah, sure. We start with her.
Hello, Christina. Thank you very much.
Hi.
For your lecture. You mentioned something about transitioning from 9-to-5 job to make it safe way. And I would say I'm doing the same right now, because I started before I was entrepreneur. Then I started my 9-to-5 job, and now I'm planning to switch between to switch on becoming again entrepreneur, which is connected with my passion. I'm just wondering how I should make this switch from the financial point of view. Do you have any suggestions how to start off and deal with this matter? Because when I'm doing the list of expenses, there's a lot of things, and I just don't know how to deal with that financially.
Well, I think first of all, one of the things I've kind of always tried to do is to find one retainer client. When you're making that shift, find that retainer client, find that contract. If you have a single business, if you're a solo entrepreneur, because that helps you kind of transition from being a full-time employee into being an entrepreneur, and it's kind of that transition point, and it helps you to kind of pay for your fixed costs. The other thing is, what kills small businesses is actually the periodization of invoices and bills. The first thing I would do is put all your bills so they come at the same time every month, or the same time of the year, or well, not do that, but spread them out, because we have insurances, we have personal insurances, we have health insurances, we have house insurances, we have the tax we have to pay, we have school fees, payment for the garage. I mean, if once you start listing all the fixed costs, start spreading them out over the year, so that they don't come all at the same time, because it's going to kill your cash flow. Cash flow kills small businesses. So that's my advice. And then get one single contract that you work to, and look for a product that is scalable, that, if you're doing consulting, what kind of products can you sell? I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah,
that
cash
gives
flow.
Me some idea. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. I think Sina is also raising her hand.
Yeah, I also had a question, because I'm super passionate about what I do, and I try to transmit this passion to the whole team and the people I work with, and like investors and etc. And the thing that I'm struggling with is how do you kind of retain your passion so that it doesn't like overcome you completely? Because at times I'm like overworking myself, and I don't take the break from it because I am so passionate about it. So I don't know, what advice do you have on that?
Well, I would take the start off by taking the amount of hours you work per day, and then you divide that by the money that you make every day or every month, and you calculate the cost per hour. And I'm not saying you should be transactional with people, but there is a tendency for some organizations to misuse the passion of young people to bring them in as into hackathons, as working as lead users or working for free. Try to avoid that. I don't believe in the free economy. It should be free. It should be free at the value of something. So even if you're giving your time for free for something, put a value on it and put that value in front of people and say, look, I'm giving you this time. This is how much it would cost normally. And set a limit to how much time you would work for free and how much time you would work for money. And then, try to shift it over to being more money making than freebies. And it's more difficult when you're younger because but you shouldn't undersell yourself. I mean, I think one thing I've learned is that men always overvalue themselves and they overvalue other men. Women undervalue themselves, but they also undervalue other women. So I think it's important to surround yourself with people that sell you, because sometimes it's easier for other people to sell you. Ask other people to sell you or to put you in front of other people. Because when you come in with your passion, you're giving away too much and people might misuse that. And there's always this kind of question of how do we transform an expertise or a skill set or a passion, into an innovative performance, and how do we make that innovative performance profitable? And it's a learning curve, but it starts with controlling your time in the nicest possible way and learning to say no to people. And if people are rude to you, just tell them to stop it. Women are always having to be so nice to people. If somebody's really rude and saying, well, I'm not going to pay for this. Or the other thing that people do is try to reduce your invoice after you've done the job, because it doesn't happen so much in Europe, but in other parts of the world, you constantly negotiate, like in the US and the Middle East. They're negotiating up or they're negotiating down, and they don't pay for 6 months. So, learn to kind of play with that, but control your time. Build an app to control your time. Yeah. I hope that was helpful. Yeah, give a presentation about time management and earnings at Rebels next time. That would be great.
Thank you very much, Christina. I think it's you were also asking us to draw something in the beginning.
Yeah.
I am super curious. How are we going? Oh, there is a question. There's Ying is asking a question. Maybe we go for her. We do have 8 minutes left. But Ying, can you please also switch on your camera that we can see your beautiful face? And then you raise your question, please.
If I can. Okay, all right. Yeah, it's working. Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Yeah. So I have a question, actually not in a direct relation to entrepreneurship. I hope it's okay, because you being based in Sweden, living over there, and you highly stated kind of the cultural maybe differences between and so we know that Northern European culture is kind of is known to be quite more equal kind of societies. So maybe with school educations, you would maybe instill more kind of confidence into girls and more feminine qualities into boys, maybe. And so that leads me to ask you the question, actually, would you think it makes sense to for companies to provide actually kind of employees with trainings that would encourage them to embody more kind of better balanced feminine, masculine, qualities, and especially in the current context, right? The DEI challenges, and we talk so much about biases, and so, and it's definitely an interesting time, for this kind of thinking and work, and inclusion starts from within, right? Being more inclusive with ourselves, with the feminine, masculine kind of better balanced, and then and that would provide a good foundation just for people to for men to be more inclusive with women, for example.
Yeah.
So what's your views on that?
Well, my take on this is that we've got a 2,000-year history to rewrite, because we've separated logic and reason from emotion and feeling. So the first thing we have to do is go back 2,000 years and reintegrate this. And you kind of have it in Chinese, in yin and yang, but it's been misinterpreted by the West to mean something else. But anyway, that's another story. But I think we need to go back and fuse back logic and reason with feeling and emotion, particularly in the context of a business and entrepreneurship, because what's happened is that women have been attributed with certain skill sets, such as feeling and emotion. And if we're criticizing, we're being emotional or we're being hysterical. Hysteria is the word for the uterus, so it comes from the uterus. We're being hysterical if we're being critical, when in fact we're just posing a logical argument. And we often hear in board meetings is like, let's move that off the table. It's a typical kind of male thing to say. We take that off the table. And it's like what women do is put it back on the table. So it's about fusing it back, but you have to start from a very young age. And I think, starting in the kindergarten, in Sweden, we start kindergarten is compulsory from the age of 3. We moved into an environment of boys and girls. We're brought up together, and we have equal access to play, to sport, to all these things. And, it's treating every child as the same, regardless. But also being able to talk about women-led and male-led, because women-led can be with men and male-led can be with women. And that kind of moves us away from male and female, which is also contagious or contentious. So women-led and male-led means that male-led can have women with him, working with him, and women-led means he can have men working with women, but leading. Leadership is about looking into the future and thinking about how we can build a future today. So it's really important that we think about the male and the female from the context of artificial intelligence, because we have to recreate 2,000-year history to add women, to fuse back male and female. But it has to come with in the family context. And it's a very slow process. If I look at my grandmother, for example, she in Sweden here 100 years ago, she could not inherit property. Her parents died in the Spanish flu when she was 17, and the property went to her uncle. My grandmother was unique. She had a business as a men's tailor, which is very unique. She had recruited all the women and the men working for her. But I think it takes generations. But it's even Sweden has had to work for a long time to have equality. But I think what we have in our culture is this consensus management. It starts with how we say skål, which is skål, lagom, and we let the bowl go around the table. So everybody knows what you only take a little bit and just enough so that it's enough for everybody. So you get trained from a very young age that if there's something, being passed around, you have to take just the right amount, and you figure out what that is, because the social consensus. So we're a bit like, we're very close to the Japanese in terms of we have strong identity and strong community, if that makes sense. But the culture, it's very important to, when you're doing business across, different countries, to understand the cultural differences. Like I was in Korea and I was the boss, you could say, and my colleague had to carry my bag for me, so to illustrate that I was the one making decisions. So, you have to kind of play with the culture a bit and I've had a business in the Middle East for about 8 years. I ran the business, I had business, and I employed women, and I traveled and did work in Saudi and all over the place. So you have to adjust to the culture, so I don't know if that answers your questions, but it's a really, really important question, and I liked it. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to thank you so much. I don't want to take too much time. I just want to add, actually, that's the societal system is one thing, but I just feel like individually speaking, we can empower individuals, people, with a better understanding of, what all those values mean by really getting deep into wisdom of those values, those qualities. And because with a broadened understanding of everything, people are just capable of thinking for themselves, and the society itself can have system put in place. But then if we empower people to think more powerfully, then we may end up having better solutions or perspectives for society at large.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the self-regulatedness and I mean, we always say in Sweden, like by the time you get to 18, your parents expect you to leave the house and take care of yourself. So everything is, you're trained to kind of do that, self-regulate, self-plan, self-organize, self-structure. And it's not because, they kick you out. It's just because they're preparing you for this self-regulatedness. And I think, Sweden is a very, probably in the old days, a very difficult country to live in and work in, and it's cold and, uninhabitable. So I think we had to develop this self-reliance, and men, women had to work side by side. If you're freezing to death and having to maintain a family and make life work, then you can't have this gender divide. It's the same in the Middle East. I've actually, in the older generations, I found the same thing. There was very interesting dynamic between the 75-year-old man and the woman. They grew up in the desert where they didn't have anything, and very interesting dynamic. So anyway, I agree.
Thank you so much, Christina, and thank you everyone for all your questions as well. It's been an absolutely fascinating session. I know that there are probably more questions. I did see some more raised hands, like Erica and Anita, but I'd invite you to reach out to Christina through the Role Model Rebels platform. As members, you can chat to other members, and you can also book mentor sessions with Christina via the platform. So do go on to Role Model Rebels to continue the conversation. And I just wondered if Christina, you wanted to see everyone's drawing.
Yes, perfect. Right. Yes.
So everyone needs to turn on their camera.
That's fabulous. That's great. That's great. If you want to post them to me or send them somewhere, but it would, that's your story, just keep on adding to it. Add your passion, add a brick every day. Think about yourself as an entrepreneur. The first thing start is just by putting it on a piece of paper, drawing yourself. It's to do with your identity. Put it up on the wall, take it out every day and work on it. It's just like a business, but it's really about your identity and who you are. You need to work on yourself. So be selfish and work on yourself and work on your business, and put that drawing on the table every single day.
Yeah, I think we should take a photo and tag you and Role Model Rebels on LinkedIn, put a little explanation on it, and then we can go back to it in the next session. As Christina and Petra said at the beginning, this is the first of 4 sessions with Christina. So do keep following Role Model Rebels on LinkedIn and check our website to find out when the next sessions will be. And thank you so much, Christina, for your valuable time and talent. It was a fantastic session, and thanks everyone for taking part.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Look forward to learning from you guys next time.
Definitely.
Thank you.